Yeah, gotta aim for the top like, hold up. Yeah, I can never doubt myself, I know better. All of you critics be acting like you know better. Blowing the smoke, but I know when the dust settles. That I'm in my element, it's evident that there's levels to the game.
What's going on, people? Welcome back to the Athletes podcast. Today we've got a roundtable discussion. Justin and Reed joining me here once again. And today we're going to talk about women's sports and how it's been absolutely exploding from college basketball to wrestling to, you name it. I mean, it started, kind of with women's USA soccer as well, as we've seen their popularity really kind of grow over the years with the World Cup and the Olympics and world titles. But it's really starting to hit that college level. And the first topic I want to hit is, where do you guys think the popularity has come from when it comes to women's sports? And we can specifically speak to women's basketball because we have such huge stars in women's basketball. When you look at the LSU team that has been put together, the team that Dawn Staley has put together at South Carolina. I mean, she lost all her starters and had another undefeated season this year at South Carolina. So there's a number of huge female athletes, not even mentioning Caitlin Clark, that have exploded onto the scene. From your guys' vantage point, and Reed, I'm going to kind of come to you first. What have you seen on the women's basketball, or at least women's sports lens, and that you've really noticed the popularity has grown?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you talk to folks who are fans of women's sports, the argument would probably be that it's always been exciting and it's always been, fun to watch. It's just not been given an appropriate platform to thrive, right? And I think we're finally at a place now where, women kind of clawed and scratched enough in that space and shouted from the rooftops enough, and people finally gave them an opportunity to play on a main linear channel or play at a time that isn't competing with, NFL football, which dominates every sport known to man, men or women. And they're showcasing that people want to watch it. And doesn't matter where the views are coming from. Yeah, it's predominantly women because it's women's sports. Just like predominantly men is going to be watching men's sports. That's just kind of how that works a lot of times. You're giving these women and these teams an opportunity to showcase who they are, what they do, and the drama that comes with sports in general, male or female. Mm-hmm. And they're rising to the occasion. That allows for us to build narratives around the Caitlin Clarks of the world and the Paige Bueckers of the world and the Madison Skinners of the world on volleyball side and things like that. And when you let people know there's a story to tell, people get bought in. I mean, I think it's a perfect example. To me, the rise of F1, honestly, in the U.S. is a really similar trajectory as the women's sports, where F1 has always been F1. It's had that intrigue on the money side. It's had the intrigue on the relationship side. It's had the intrigue on the skill side. But predominantly, people in the U.S. didn't care because we didn't have any way to connect with the platform and the base in the U.S. And once Netflix sort of lowered that barrier to entry and allowed people to, understand what that was and understand what role it could play in their life and in their entertainment sphere, people jumped on like wildfire. I think it's the same thing, in my opinion, on the women's sports side, and specifically with the college game. You have people that are already coming in with, and Justin will talk about this in a minute, sort of this inherent trust and this inherent love of the brand. And so when you can attach that brand and the love of that brand to what's happening, I mean, we got an Iowa Hawkeye faithful on the call right now, and he could probably speak a little more, on the impact of just what Caitlin Clark, for example, has done, in Iowa City and what that's done for the team as a whole.
Yeah. I mean, I can. Right.
Yeah, I mean, I could jump in on that too. I think one of the other things that before we get to like the Caitlin Clarks of the world, is like, I think, speaking from the basketball background, like this really started with Steph Curry, because in my perception, in my point of view, Steph's game inspired many other people, both boys and girls, to get to excellence at the game because it's something they could replicate, right? It wasn't, you didn't have to be 6'8" and dunk, right? Like the Jordan era, inspired a lot of people, but like you also had to be sort of like a freak of nature to do all the things that he wanted to, that he did, right? And like to be like Mike, right? So like there's a whole movie about the kid being able to dunk, right? because he had the shoes. Now, like Steph is like just you could shoot you. It's about handles and shooting, and that's something that can be replicated in the backyard. So you get, and you see it in Clark's game. If we're talking about her, like she has a lot of Steph Curry inspired movement, shot stroke, step back, things of that nature. And so I think, much like we saw in soccer, we finally had someone in a role model that you could replicate it as a kid. And I think that's part of the reason why the women's basketball game, the college basketball game for women's, has gotten the quality of the product is improved, because it's improved dramatically over the last 10 years as far as like what the players and are able to do as far as skill set. But I also think women's basketball is having a moment where we have bigger stars in the women's game than we do in the men's game. Part of that is because the guys stay around for 1 year, so you don't get that continuity, right? We've got one and dones. You're kind of loyal to your home team, but like your team could be switched over every year, right, with the transfer portal and people going to the league. Whereas women's basketball, they're still staying for 4. So like even though Paige Bueckers hasn't played, she missed a year, right? She played this year, but she missed all of last year coming off her Player of the Year season. Like we all know her name because we know she's still going to be around, right? And so, having 3 years of Caitlin Clark being dominant has enabled her to not only build her brand, but like build a name for herself in the fact that we know where to see her and we can watch her game and we can appreciate it in a way that we don't get it on the men's side, right? It's much more small sample size. I would also say the women's game feels like college basketball. The men's game kind of feels like poor man's NBA, very much a product of the AAU circuit, whereas like women's college basketball has continuity, it has names, it has teamwork, it has cohesiveness, right? Which is what basketball fans, diehards and casuals want to see out of the game. So I think that has been super dynamic and allowing this generation of high school or college women's basketball, we're using as an example, but it's across the entirety of the college landscape to have a moment, right? And it's a very interesting time to be on the sidelines and watch it, but it's also a microcosm of what we're hoping will eventually get to the pro league. Of like, can we allow the momentum we've built in this college sphere to then grow the game in all areas of sport for the women's side moving forward.
Yeah. I want to touch on that even further, right? Like it's the camaraderie of college sports. It's the tribalism of college sports, right? Like, I may have played football at a Division III school, but I've always grown up as a Florida State fan. And I became a Florida State fan very young as a Florida State football fan, and that's grown into these other sports, right? Like the Florida State baseball team is currently undefeated. The Florida State softball team made it to the national championship last year. And it was because I was a Florida State fan and because I signed up for the newsletters, and you get these emails that you're like, oh, wow, like it's not just football over here. They're doing things on many different fields. The women's soccer team won a national title this year. You're able to have the same camaraderie with the one sport that you fell in love with and made you a fan of that school and brought the student section together. It's starting to spread, and you're starting to see it across just having school pride. And I think that's, what you're saying about, it feels like college sports when you watch women's basketball, because it's the atmosphere that they're putting behind it. We're in March right now. March Madness was always the biggest and baddest thing that I can ever remember growing up. And obviously, I'm a wrestler, so things for me were always decided on the mat, not so much decided on the court. But I used to do a bracket. Everybody wanted to see, what was happening on the court. They wanted to see that Kemba Walker step back, those huge, tremendous moments that we used to see back then with the men's side of things. Now, people really can't even name a men's basketball player, and I think, on the college side, and Shannon Sharp said this the other day. He's like, I can name 5 women before I can name one college men's basketball player, and you're seeing it. And it's honestly with the power of the NIL and marketability, we are starting to see the women's game take over because they're they're saying, okay, well, now we have social media. We're going to bring you in as a fan over here. And I'm not just showing you what goes into my day to day. I'm also going to showcase the fact that all this work that I'm doing is good enough for you to put as an ESPN highlight. It is an ESPN #1 moment of Caitlin Clark breaking Pistol Pete's record, right? It is a moment for Nike as well to put up huge billboards of Caitlin Clark as she hits, the three, right? Like, it's these big time moments. It's Gatorade signing Paige Bueckers, right? It's these things that we are now seeing on the women's side where they're talking trash, just like we've seen a lot of the men do. They're out here, they're competing hard. The physicality of their game is there on the women's side. There's a lot more finesse that's going on. And I think that you're right about the Steph Curry replication of things, where Steph Curry wasn't born 6'17". He's not LeBron James. He's not Michael Jordan. He's a guy with handles who can shoot, and all of that can certainly be cultivated and bred in the gym, on the blacktop. If you're in your room with a hoop above your door and a balled up piece of paper, it's the precision that you can put in that sort of work everywhere. And you're really seeing the women like Caitlin Clark, like Flage, like Haley Van Lith, like all of these girls. I mean, Juju Watkins is a freshman and she's lighting things up for USC women, right? Like,
yeah,
she goes to the same school as LeBron James's son, and Juju Watkins is the basketball spotlight in that school, right? Like, obviously Bronny James is going to get his time. He's LeBron James' son.
Right.
But when you look at basketball at USC, if you go to the page, which I did earlier today, you go to the page, Juju Watkins is on the front page. Men aren't on the front page. The women are. So it's a testament to what the work they're putting in and how they're showcasing this on elite levels all the time.
If we're talking about from a school value brand situation as well, on the women's basketball side, and really women's sports in general, the schools know they have time and they can build these people or these brands up correctly, right? So like with Juju, they're starting with her, and they're going to build her up for 4 years to be this monster of a brand, because they know they have time and they can do it effectively. And they did the same thing with Caitlin, right? She came in her first year, was put up crazy numbers. They're like, cool, we're going to start doing deals, blah, blah. Nike didn't even come in until this year, right? But like, Nike wouldn't have been a possibility if they had the time, or she left after her second year, or those things, right? This is the reality of the game. Whereas the men's game, like, I can't remember his name, but like, there's one that cat that's coming in to Duke next year. It's #1 overall recruit. He's gonna be there for a year, and then he's gonna go to the league. Like, there's no, like, the only NIL stuff he's gonna get probably is stuff that's Duke specific. It's not gonna be global brands, because he's gonna go to the league, and then he's just gonna be another guy.
Yeah, and it's incredible to me that, the NIL resource, where you've seen the good, bad, and ugly of NIL. And I think the women are truly benefiting, where they're able to be marketed, and there's a lot of marketability behind these women, where they are coming in, and it's almost like as soon as they have one explosive outing as a player, you are starting a Heisman campaign for them, right? Like, right. It's honestly what it looks like. Normally it's something you used to see back in the 90s, in the early 2000s, with these quarterbacks at these big schools, where they're like, he's the Heisman hopeful for next year. We're probably going to start to see it, for NCAA football coming in the coming months, right? Mm-hmm. Now for these women, it's like they're getting their Heisman campaigns going very early after they, have a breakout game, and then they're on the scene. They're starting these campaigns with NIL, with marketing, and it's inevitably bringing the numbers in. I mean, the women's basketball tournament, it was reported, I believe, almost a month ago, that it was damn near sold out already. Mm-hmm. They're going to have over 100. It's almost 110,000 people.
Cleveland?
I think that's where it's at, that are going to be going and watching the women's game. Not only that, Caitlin Clark isn't even in the WNBA yet, And the Indiana Fever is already seeing ticket sales go up. They haven't even drafted her yet. And they have the pick. They are already saying it's going to be her. We're bringing her here. She's coming here. Like, and you're already seeing ticket sales change for the Indiana Fever. So like, it's incredible to see. I love seeing it. I've watched it on the women's wrestling side for a very long time as I've covered wrestling. Iowa is like the first Division I team to have a women's team, a designated women's team. Obviously there are a number of women's wrestling teams, but they're like the first really big one. They're the first really big domino that kind of came in and said, we're going to have a women's wrestling team. We're going to get ahead of it. And that was a very big deal. And you're seeing how huge things are going. And it is absolutely huge when you start to see how these things are going. And, you know, the Caitlin Clarks of the world, the Angel Reese, the Juju Watkins, Flage, I mean, Haley Van Lith, like these women are incredible, and they're being coached by incredible women as well. You know, I mentioned Dawn Staley. She was transcendent when she was in the league, and now she's doing huge things on the college level, which is amazing, right? So like the things that Dawn Staley has been able to do, like I mentioned before, the back-to-back seasons of being undefeated with brand new starters coming in, that's incredible. That includes a win over the reigning national champion LSU Tigers. Like that's unheard of to do that, right? Those are things that Nick Saban used to do in football. Oh, I have a new quarterback. We're still Bama. We're still going to win, right? So like, I hate to give her kind of a male counterpart. It's more Pat Summitt-ish, right? If we're going to stay in the women's game, it is Pat Summitt type things that Dawn Staley is doing, you know, and that's how transcendent these women have been in the women's game. Reed, I want to bring it to you on the admission side. How have normally we're looking at this from a men's football lens type of thing. And not to say that that's still not the kind of the catalyst and driving factor in a lot of admissions things, but the women's things are starting to change that, right? You're starting to see, maybe a little bit more of a shift when it comes to the admissions side. What are you seeing in your research that would indicate that the women are really kind of taking hold of the stake in that position?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think we're probably going to get even more data on that, I would imagine. Iowa's going to be our best example, in my opinion, this upcoming year, now that we sort of, Caitlin has risen to what she has risen to and gotten the notoriety that she has. I'll be interested to see if there are any shifts there. I still think that as a whole, football obviously dominates that just by nature of football being an American, being what it is in the U.S. sport lens. But I think it crushes both men's and women's sports so aggressively on either side that it's hard to get a gauge for what that looks like. But what I will say is it's interesting to see these athletic departments and these different programs as a whole, start to divide their ad dollars and their marketing dollars to their fan base across men's and women's sports. I think they're doing a better job, in my opinion. And obviously we're seeing Iowa on this front. UConn's always been, fairly dominant. South Carolina's always, is rising in dominance on the basketball side. Texas, has a strong basketball team, but their volleyball team is unreal. The number one girls participated sport in the country, by the way. And they're spending a lot more time promoting those elements of the athletics department on top of just football and men's basketball. And I think that's been a really interesting shift. They're understanding, colleges at the end of the day are businesses, and they have to respond to the demand of their constituents. And they're clearly seeing some sort of buyback, or whether it be investment, donation, application, whatever, from showcasing all elements of their athletics department, men and women. And so that, I think, has been really telling on that front. But I want to circle back too, though, on that NIL stuff, because I think, just to sort of add my 2 cents on that, I agree entirely with what Justin said on the investment side, right? I think these companies are realizing that they can get a way bigger bang for their buck on investing in these female athletes in college than they can on the men a lot of times, for 2 main reasons, in my opinion. One is the longevity, right? A lot of these men, their whole goal is just go, major in eligibility, and get out, as much as I don't want to admit that as somebody who tries to have kids pick kids for college. Yeah. Women, I think, just for so long have, just sort of lived under this idea of, listen, this isn't going to be your full-time thing. You don't have the chance to go make these 7-figure sums that these men do in these leagues. And so we've got to understand what comes next. So not only are they staying in college longer to get that degree and therefore are more marketable for a long period of time, I think too, and some of this does stem obviously from working with high school kids and men and women. Women are just naturally more mature a lot of times in this kind of stuff. They've got a better idea of how to provide that value and how to demonstrate value and really lean into something and sort of buy into it. And I think a lot of female athletes see this as, you know, a really viable additional revenue stream. I think they see this as a lot of opportunities to network and connect with people, you know, in their world beyond sport, no matter how long it goes. And the output and the product that you see from a lot of these female athletes when it comes to their NIL deals, in my opinion, is a lot more genuine. It's a lot more high quality. It's a lot easier to buy into. And I think advertisers are noticing that and they're responding to it. I mean, you look at, you know, my two sort of, the proven concept, you know, would be, in my opinion, Livy Dunn on Vuori.
Yeah.
Like she very carefully selected Vuori as the brand she was going to back. I'll admit I had never heard of him before, didn't even know how to spell the name before she came into play. And now, I mean, those people, they've exploded. And she's the only athlete-related endorsement that I can find on their website. And if I'm wrong, please tell me. But, I mean, she single-handedly, in my opinion, at least in that demographic of people, blew that place up in a way that I'm not sure people could have necessarily anticipated.
It's like the Stanley Cup thing, or the Stanley's, the big cups, right? They got one person with influence to really buy into them, and then bang, right? We're in.
Yeah, and you have those up. Yeah, and you've got, I mean, you know, obviously the Gatorades and Paige Bueckers and Nike and Caitlin. I mean, those are all there. But you're seeing it again. I'm going to go back to the volleyball side because, again, went to Texas. Volleyball's awesome. Love it. Watch it. There's a company, I want to make sure I get the name right. I pulled it up over here. There's a company named Avoli, I think is what you call it. And they're sort of, they just launched in 2023. Their hope is to be sort of the first, you know, volleyball specific apparel company, because there's not really been one that's really dedicated to women's volleyball. And the first 3 endorsers that they signed were Texas Longhorns, Nebraska Cornhuskers, Virginia Cavaliers. They chose 3 studs from those 3 schools.
Yeah,
that's big.
And I'm telling you, I'm putting my stake in right now that company is going to explode, in my opinion, in the next 2 to 4 years, because they're serving a market that has wanted representation. They're serving a market that obviously has buy-in with participation, and now they have people with notoriety, longevity, and the ability to share in that growth that are teaming up with them for something that women are obviously proving to us they've wanted for a long time. We just simply haven't given them the space to do so. So
there wasn't the leagues, and there wasn't the stepping stone after, right? Like we've had the WNBA, obviously. Now we have the new volleyball league, right? We've got
there's 3 of them.
Right, there's this consortium now with like the pro softball, so there's more opportunity now, but like for the majority of kids doing NIL, like it ends after college because your value's there, but like these people that are that are pushing back on like Caitlin declaring for the draft, I was like, the Jujus, the Paiges of the world, like their NIL deals, they're going to continue. Because those are more valuable than the conferences or the leagues you're going to. But to the point about your branding component is like, if that money follows these athletes and it's able to continue to grow, that is how you change leagues. That is how you change TV deals. That is how you make real impact on these new and or older leagues, right? Like the WNBA is never really going to get out of their own way until the NBA teams don't have ownership and they change the season, right? Like that's my own opinion, but like it puts a cap on it. But like we've also never had a star like Caitlin Clark go to the WNBA. Like Taurasi is probably one of the greatest basketball players of all time, right? You've got the Maya Moores, you've got Sabrina, you've got all these other names, but none of them had this hype going into that league. Right. And so if she's able to be successful, like sky's the limit on what they can do as far as pushing that in a direction where like the WNBA matters to the casual fan as opposed to just the people that are WNBA fanatics.
Yeah. And I think Caitlin Clark definitely has the chance to bring more eyes to the WNBA. And I think she sees that. I think there's a number of companies that want to back her and do deals with her. I mean, she just signed with Gainbridge, which is already an Indianapolis-based company. I mean, she's preparing, obviously. She's a brand ambassador for Gainbridge. She's preparing to be in the league, play for the Indiana Fever, and do the things that she wants to do. But, like, there really hasn't been this kind of hype behind a college player going to the WNBA really ever. Right. Like I can remember, Skylar Diggins being on, I think she's Skylar Diggins Smith now, but I can remember her being on the covers of magazines and things like that. And everybody was just like, wow, she plays really well, but she didn't have NIL deals to back her. She didn't have, social media wasn't social media the same way that it was when she was coming out of the league and going into the
Deladon would have been a completely different animal.
Completely different. And I'll be honest, I became a huge fan of Elena Deladon when I saw her on LeBron's show, The Shop, and she spoke about the things that she spoke about, right? Like where she was talking about traveling and how they don't have the same sort of, travel privileges that the NBA men have. And and then not only that, but like Kelsey Plum talking about the things that she talks about on podcasts.
Right.
Like everybody remembers Chelsea Plum. Now they remember Chelsea Plum as the girl that had the absolute cannon of an arm and fired that t-shirt to the top of the stadium. And then they realize, oh yeah, she's a WNBA player and she's also really awesome. And then she marries Darren Waller, right? Like there was certainly ways of everybody connecting the dots to see like how awesome these players were all along, but nobody actually took the time to say, oh, they're absolutely balling over on that side. So when you watch the 3-point contest between
Sabrina
and Steph Curry, everybody was like, and everybody went at Kenny on the broadcast, as they should have, because he's talking about, oh, she's using a different ball and whatever else. It's like, she's using the ball she's used to. She's using the ball that she plays with. They don't ask them. And that's the thing is, if Steph Curry would have shot the women's ball, I guarantee you it would have been different for him as well. 100%. So while it may have been an advantage for her to shoot with the ball that she shot with, it was also an advantage for Steph Curry to shoot with the ball that he likes too, because he's used to it. And his shot is tailored to the weight and the flight of that ball, just like hers is. But she proved that she's an absolute shooter and she's a beast. And she was up at the same platform, same 3-point line. And she said it at the end of it, shoot or shoot. And when you can shoot, that's literally what it's all about. So like putting women and up against men in those platforms where it's an equal playing field. I think that's where you're able to showcase how amazing, these women are, and that you shouldn't take anything away from them when it comes to how they compete. I've had a chance of seeing many of the female wrestlers compete. And yes, the competitiveness isn't on the same level as the men when it comes to wrestling, but I have seen them compete. I've seen them up close and personal compete in practices. I've seen them step on the scale and, make weight and make sacrifices for, not, having to diet and exercise and everything else in between, just like the men do. There's no different. These women they're tough as nails and they'll throw you on your head. Right. Like, so every chance I get, I give these women props because they're on the same mats. They're hitting some of the same moves. Like these things, like they're in the same practice. In most instances, they're practicing with the men until recently, where women's high school teams were actually formed. They had to just practice with other men's wrestlers and wrestle in men's tournaments or travel very far in order to get competition against other women. There wasn't a lot of it, but now you're seeing more and more states starting to sanction women's wrestling because they should. It is the right thing to do. There's a lot of girls that want to wrestle. They want to be the next Helen, the next Chikara. They want to do these things on a very high level. There's no difference. And you're really starting to see that behind the marketing that you have behind them, behind the support that they have, the coaches that they have. The dreams aren't any different. It's the support that they have that truly is. And we're starting to see that support really come full circle with these tremendous athletes on the college level.
It makes me very happy to see boys and girls both wearing Caitlin Clark jerseys, right?
Yeah.
Because then we get past what gender, what sport, whatever. We just get to a point where like this person is a role model.
It's just ball.
And it's just ball, and she's doing great things, right? My
Travis
hope
Scott
is
was
that
just
we're
at Caitlin Clark's game.
he was there with Jake from State Farm, insane. But like, my hope is that Caitlin is the start, right? Caitlin, Paige, Reese, all these gals are just the start, because they've made such a impact. But I'm also a little skeptical that like we're not also just like in this like peak era of like we just hit the right people at the right time post COVID and now we're here. And so I'm optimistic, but when you've got a couple generational people at the same time, it's hard to replicate that, at least in a singular sport.
In my opinion, it still comes down though to platform and accessibility, right? And I think you prove it on the men's side and the women's side with any given sport. Take baseball, for example. When they put these playoff games at 1 p.m. on a Tuesday on these best of threes playoff games, I mean, you've got me who works from home and like 7 dudes over 50 at a bar watching that game. So you could have the coolest game in the world. You could have this high stakes situation, but if you don't put it in a position to succeed, it's not going to succeed. My hope is that with the pull and the push that we've had from the folks who are in the spaces for a volleyball, a softball, women's hockey right now, basketball, that you can get the correct stepping stones to put these women's sports events in positions to be seen and to be appreciated. For example, putting Sabrina in the men's all-star event provides an accessibility for people who would not otherwise open up any WNBA content or streaming to see what she can do. And there's always going to be people that come in and bash and hate and whatever else. And you know what? Good on them. Like, it's annoying that they want to do it publicly and it's annoying that they want to do those things. But my feeling, and the numbers seem to follow it, is that there's more people that see Sabrina in that space and go, oh shit, that girl can play. And then buy into more of what she's doing, buy into more of the things she's involved in, and potentially, hopefully, matriculate into somebody who's now watching and engaging in that sport. That's always, in my opinion, going to sort of supersede the folks that just are going to hate on it for the sake of hating on it. And I think you see that with Sabrina. I think you see it in the national championship game for volleyball this last year. They finally weren't competing with a football game. They didn't stick it on like a 3 p.m. on a Sunday. They put it during a prime time. They put it on ABC. And it was the highest rated volleyball event that I think they've ever seen. It was up like 93% or something from the year before. And it was 3 straight sets. I mean, Texas manhandled Nebraska, which nobody expected. But like, it wasn't arguably the most intense game, but it was in a place and in a position for people to see it, interact with it, and engage with it. And that's so much of what causes this stuff. I mean, you think of any everyone avoids NFL Sundays and now, honestly, college football Saturdays like the plague, if they want their show or their whatever to be seen. I mean, you look at the top 100 broadcasts last year, 93 of them were football. NFL football. 3 of them were college football. There was the Oscars, the Thanksgiving Day Parade, and 1 political program. That's it in the top. So, I mean, nobody is going to. So if you stop putting them at noon and 3 p.m. on a Saturday and a Sunday and you stick them at their own time to be able to thrive, you're going to get a buyback from that. It just is what it is. Same thing with Caitlin Clark. They put that game in a position for people to watch it and engage with it. And so many folks got to watch her make history. And and that is going to stick with so many folks that engage with that sport and make them want to continue either to follow Caitlin specifically into the WNBA and grow an interest in it, or stick with the sport of basketball or whatever engagement level that is.
What's the most valuable content in the world right now? It's live sports, right?
It is.
Like, even more so than it was 5-10 years ago, right? It's the only thing that draws numbers. It's the only thing that draws fans because you can't watch it on demand, right? It's got to be live or you're going to see it on Twitter. And so, with what they're trying to do,
there's extreme FOMO when it comes to it.
Right, 100%. And so, like, what Disney with Iger and whatever the other company is trying to do to like create a sports network specifically, like, they're doing all this stuff because they know that's where the money is, right? That's where that's where ad revenue drives, right? And so, that's part of it too, as far as we're in this kind of vortex of, hey, we need more content. Okay, how can we pull more storylines out of places we haven't tapped into yet, right? Is that women's volleyball? Is that women's soccer? Is that men's polo? Pick your sport, right? That's been underserved, right? Is that right? My guess is men's championship weekend for wrestling will probably have its best viewership this year because we're only seeing it go up, right? And so just the need for that content is such in high demand right now that we're enabling, as Reed said, to have a platform innately ready and willing to take on more of a investment in these athletes. And we're also at a time now where athletes are more prepared, or at least being pushed in a way to be more prepared to actually take advantage of those platforms, right? And so it's kind of a perfect storm for that. But then we get to the point where like, what's next, right?
Yeah. And I mean, I can remember growing up and the Olympics was the epitome of everything when it came to sports. And not to say that it's not now, but like there's such huge Super Bowls all around. I was flying back. Where was I flying back from? I can't remember, but I was about to get on a flight, sitting in the Delta Lounge, and I opened my laptop to watch the women's national championship from last year, to watch LSU versus Iowa, right? Like I wanted to see that game, and I was traveling, and I made sure that I was going to watch that game as I was traveling. I looked to my left and my right. All these other people are watching it too. Like I said, I'm sitting in the Delta Lounge. It's on the TVs. So like everybody is making sure that they're tuning in to watch this game, because when it all boils down, and I'm throwing my journalism hat on strong here, it's about storytelling. If you do not tell the story of these athletes, if you do not build context around why it's important. I'm working on content for the NCAA conference championships this weekend. If you do not build context around why this matchup matters, then people are, you still have your diehards that are going to watch. But when you speak about it, it's, hey, these guys wrestled at the beginning of the season. It was a 1-point match, or these guys wrestled. Like, can you believe that this is different now? Like they were tooth and nail before, or he got pinned before. It's the same exact thing that we have this year of what they're trying to build off of. South Carolina basketball has been amazing under Dawn Staley. LSU has been amazing as well. Iowa, same thing. You're able to build these storylines around these incredible women who are doing incredible things for a long period of time because you got that longevity out of it, right? And that was the biggest thing about it, is you were able to build around their personalities, their marketability, and their skills ultimately. At the end of the day, they had the skills to back up all the money that was being thrown in. And you're right, it takes a tremendous amount of time. But when you put that effort behind the right people, and those right people prove you to be right, this is where my investment is going to go. It's going to go into Angel Reese. It's going to go into Caitlin Clark. That's where the money is. Now look where it is, right? And Reed, you talk about volleyball a lot. Nebraska is the complete case study of why you invest in volleyball with the company that you mentioned before. Nebraska holds so many records for fan attendance. They had, they sold out, no matter where you put Nebraska volleyball, they were selling out every venue.
They hold the record for the largest women's sporting event attendance ever globally on an exhibition game in Nebraska. Like, I don't think people fully understand.
No, it's amazing.
That number. Like, it's, to your point, it's not a conference game, not a championship game. They played Omaha. God love Omaha. It was Nebraska versus Omaha outside.
That was it.
That's a 3-0 match for sure.
Yeah, larger than the Euros, larger than the World Cup. I mean, we're talking all sports. That is... Could you have a more obvious indicator of interest?
Time. It's time and consistency, right? Like, how long does it take if we're gonna buy a couch, right? How many times we gotta look at the couch? How many times do we gotta research it? How many times, like, some people have, more or less tolerance in that, but like, it's a lot, right? For you to make that investment. Time is the most valuable thing we have. And for us to want to invest time into what we're doing, we have to see the value in it. I haven't watched, this is kind of sucky, but I haven't watched the college basketball game at all this year from a men's side of things, right? And I have no, there's nothing just selling me on that, right? And I feel like that's kind of the narrative across the country as far as like college basketball on the men's side is as thought-provoking or there's not enough stories being told there that are interesting enough to warrant the casual viewer's time. Women's side, as we spoke about this entire podcast, holy smokes, we got a bunch.
I watched LSU South Carolina.
Yeah,
I was in on that game, right? That's honestly,
Mm-hmm.
I saw it on TV. I was like, I am watching this game. It was a deliberate effort to watch that game, right?
Yep.
And growing up, I can remember, a ton of female athletes. Dominique Dawes was a gymnast who I can remember watching at the Olympics. I can remember, seeing, highlights of women's track and field athletes, incredible athletes. And I think that that's where they were getting so much prowess, was that the women's Olympic gymnasts were incredible, right? Like, and still to this day,
still are,
right?
Yeah.
Like, incredible gymnasts. We've always had that. We've always had incredible track athletes, still do. But I think there's just becoming a trickle down effect in viewership where you're looking at the ability of the individual playing the sport. And that's the only thing that it matters. Coupled with obviously the camaraderie and the tribalism that comes with college sports. When you have
mainstream,
when you're a fan of a
mainstream
school,
now. Yeah,
exactly. When you're a fan of a school, you're like, my school's playing, I'm completely about it, right? And I can attest to it because, like I said, I cover all these college sports, but I also cover international wrestling, right? So like, when you look at how viewership drops off for the Olympics or the World Championships, I don't even think it's not even on television, right? The Olympics will be, but the men's and women's wrestling world champ, they're not. The drop off in viewership is ridiculous because your diehard fans are the only ones that are going to follow these athletes. When it's Penn State's wrestling Iowa, we know what's going on there.
It's on ESPN.
Right? That's all you need to know, right? Is Penn State's wrestling Iowa. I don't need to know all the rules. I know that my team is wrestling a team we don't like, and we don't want to see them win. That's it. That's all I need. When it's USA versus any other country, you're like, oh, I want to see USA win, but like, oh, that's cool. We won the most medals. Right. There's not a swimming fan around. Michael Phelps is getting ready to jump in the pool. You're watching it. And the reason you're watching it is because he's incredible and the marketability behind him. Yep. Same thing with Katie Ledecky.
I was going to say Ledecky on the women's side.
I was going to say Simone. Yeah.
And Simone Biles on as a, like, it just all works out, man. It just all works out. And I love the fact that covering women's sports, as I obviously don't cover them exclusively, but watching women's sports, interviewing female wrestlers, seeing what they're putting out on social media and what they're doing there, like, it's awesome because they're building their marketability, and that's the best part about it. So I'm going to, give each one of you guys kind of a last word here. So starting with Justin, what is your, last word about the topic of growth of women's sports?
I think we are in a moment for women's sports that we have never really seen before, across college sports specifically. And I am excited to see the growth of not only that game, but how it transcends into the next level. I heard one podcaster talk this week about how, college basketball in the 80s kind of led to the 90s, early 2000s growth and boom in the NBA, because we were able to sort of catapult off this momentum and then drag that into the next wave or the next evolution of basketball into the pros. And so I'm excited to see if, from a Caitlin Clark, Paige, pick your star right now, to WNBA or the international game for that matter. Does playing in Russia or playing overseas with some of these girls who have this notoriety, right? Do they take their talents to Europe or Asia to play, and does that help that game, or do they stay home and do something else, right? Or find other ways to stay relevant and or grow the game locally? Like, I'm very interested to see how that dynamic works because the WNBA season is only four months, as well as how does the next evolution of NIL as far as how we continue to get more educated on that, how schools are figuring out how to engulf branding and invest in their players and their talent, we'll say, and see what that holds. So the future is bright. I believe I'm optimistic about it, but we certainly haven't necessarily been here before on the women's game side of things.
Yeah. Reed, last word.
Seems only appropriate that I would use a baseball quote as a washed-up baseball player, but if you build it, they will come. I mean, I think that this is, in my opinion, what the growth on the women's side has been. Perfect example of that exact mantra, in the sense of, for the longest time, we gave women's sports the smallest sliver of opportunity to showcase what it could do in, primetime spots, in any type of notoriety content, whatever it is. And in the past multiple years, certainly, they have just crushed it out of the park every single time they've been given an opportunity. And then they look up and go like, why can't you let me do this more? And I think we're finally getting to a point where people are understanding, at the end of the day, where the almighty dollar goes is where people really feel. You can say as much as you want on TV, you can release as many press releases as you want, but when people start truly investing and putting their money where their mouth is on this stuff, that's when you're going to see the returns. And it feels like we're finally starting to get that. We're getting that with media rights deals that are coming in through, women's college sports. We're getting that through, women's college March Madness. We're getting that through, the NWSL to me is a great example of people. Yeah. The expansion opportunities there, people's desire to want to bring teams, the growth and investment that people are having already in their equity when it comes to ownership rights in those teams. We're proving it left and right. They are proving it left and right on the women's side, that when you give them an opportunity and when you allow them to build it, people are coming. People are responding to that. People want to see that. And so I just hope that it continues to grow and they're continued to be given opportunities so that we can see how high that rises. Because I'm a firm believer that the more sports, the better. I don't care where it comes from. If it's high quality, if it's entertaining. Bowers, our one of our advisors and a professor at UT, has one of my favorite quotes where, we want sports to be inherently good or inherently bad, and they're not. They inherently are. It's what you put into it is what you get out of it. And we think, for example, the men's game right now, we're not getting a lot. We're not putting a lot into the men's college basketball side, so we're not getting a lot out. We're putting a lot in on the women's side, and we're getting a lot out. And if we continue to see that in other sports, man, more power to you. I would love to put more things on this TV. I consume it like crazy. I don't care where it comes from. So if you build it, they will come.
You would use an Iowa quote.
I'm just going to honestly echo the sentiment that you guys said. I want to see more growth in women's sports. Specifically for me, like I said, I've said it a number of times. I cover wrestling. I want to see more female wrestlers out there. I want to see them, they're moving closer to having a Division I women's national championship. So I want to see more of that. But, I've got nieces who are going to do incredible things. I want to see them have every opportunity that my nephews have, right? I have a nephew who plays college football. I have a nephew that plays flag football, right? Like I have another nephew that is a teenager and plays football. Like I want to see my nieces and nephews have all of the opportunities that they can possibly have. Grew up watching sports from a very close eye. And I can tell you that when you put in the work, you get out what you put in. And I want to continue to see that happen for the women. I want to see it continue to grow. So with that, gentlemen, I will conclude today, but it was a great conversation. It was nuanced for a couple of gentlemen that have some expensive pieces of paper that probably don't utilize them as much as we should. But
I do not.
I will certainly say it was another good conversation and look forward to doing it again very, very soon.